Okay. Okay. Not white power. But hey guys, today we're gonna be watching some videos while I eat fucking McDonald's. Are you guys ready to hear me fucking eat McDonald's and watch a fucking video? Okay, let's get into it. Sorry, my phone's going off in the background if you hear it. Okay. Let me pull up the stream to see if we're good or not. Okay, we are. We're good. We're good. Okay, I'm gonna put this in low quality. I can just pause it. The internet can totally see you now, so okay. But okay, wait, let me hear my mic. Okay, low quality. I can just pause it. Okay, we're gonna be watching stories from our disturbing world. I'm gonna be eating this fucking McDouble. I have a McDouble, McChicken, and some fries and cookies, nigga. But yeah, let's get into it.
Sponsored by Audible. As we go through the motions of everyday life, it's easy to lose track and end up zoning out. You know what I mean. Personally, when I'm doing things that I consider boring, be it exercising or cooking, I try to listen to something educational, entertaining, or both, just so I'm not stuck in my own head. And
The
for
fuck?
years, I've been doing this with the help of Audible, which grants me access to an unbeatable selection of audiobooks ranging from bestsellers, mysteries,
Give up.
thrillers,
Always look
memoirs,
at your
self-help,
food.
and more. With 3 credits per month, I can choose any audiobook I like regardless of price, and 2 exclusive Audible originals. The best part, credits roll over so there's no rush to actually use them. In case you needed a recommendation to get yourself started, I'm going to suggest The World of Lore: Dreadful Places by Aaron Mahnke for those of you interested in dark history. Start
Nah.
listening today with a 30-day Audible trial. Choose 1 audiobook and 2 Audible originals absolutely free by visiting audible.com/Raimbot or text Raimbot to 500 500. Again, that's audible.com/Raimbot or just text Raimbot to 500 500. Thank you so much to Audible
You're
for being
welcome.
a longtime sponsor,
Oh,
and with that said,
sorry.
on to the show. Welcome to episode 2 of Stories from Our Disturbing World, the series where we take a tour of the dark side of reality. And in this episode, we look at 5 real-life tales dealing in everything from a narrow escape from a stalker all the way to a quarantine that lasted over 100 years. As the title suggests, the content of this
Hopefully that
video
doesn't
can
happen.
be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. It goes without saying that lately the world has been turned upside down, and normal day-to-day life as we know it has basically come to a screeching halt. COVID-19, as you all surely know, is the reason why. But we're not here to talk about that tonight. Instead, I'd like to turn your attention to an illness considered by many now to be a thing of the past, and the impact it had on my home, Hawaii. A disease that resulted in the forced quarantine
Her
via
home?
exile for thousands of Hawaiians who would never see their homes or their loved ones ever again. In the mid-1800s, Hawaii was a much different place from the one that it is today. Back then, it wasn't a part of America, not as a state nor as a territory, but rather it was its very own kingdom. On the bright side of things, the country was experiencing an economic boom thanks to the sugarcane industry and the success of its plantations. But on the other hand, however, was a new disease. Leprosy, to be exact. On official terms, leprosy is known as Hansen's disease and has been around for as long as humankind can remember. No one knows for sure exactly where it started or when, but what we do know in this modern age is that it's caused by a bacterial infection. The results of leprosy are both catastrophic and heartbreaking, the most common hallmarks being physical deformities, skin sores, muscle weakness, and nerve damage that can ultimately amount to horrifying results for patients. According to leprosy.org, the bacteria attack nerve endings and destroy the body's ability to feel pain and injury. Without feeling pain, people injure themselves and the injuries can become infected, resulting in tissue loss. Fingers and toes become shortened and deformed
Puke,
as the
I'm
cartilage
eating.
is absorbed into the body. Repeated injury and infection of numb areas in the fingers or toes can cause bones to shorten. The tissues around them shrink. making them short. Bacteria entering the mucous lining of the nose can lead to internal damage and scarring, which in time causes the nose to collapse. If the facial nerve is affected, a person loses the blinking reflex of the eye, which can eventually lead to dryness, ulceration, and blindness.
Not everybody became blind, but many.
When you felt yourself going blind and knowing that others at the settlement tended to be shut-ins once they were blind, did you tell anyone?
I keep robbing. Mama,
Yeah.
you heard me. She said, yes, son. She continues robbing. Each time it's getting harder.
Watch out for
and
my
harder.
microphone.
Mama, I'm blind. And I could hear her sobbing as she keeps rubbing harder and harder. And my daddy, I can tell when he's crying, he starts sniffing, you know.
These are exactly the conditions thousands of
I'm
Hawaiians
watching a
were
video.
suffering from in the mid-1800s, something made especially terrifying given the fact that the native population had no history with the disease before the arrival of Westerners. To them, this was entirely unprecedented, and given the era, there was no known cure. In fact, a solution wouldn't
Stop
become known
talking,
to the
please.
world until nearly a century later. As mass panic across the kingdom began to swell, the government took action, and in 1865, the Act to Prevent the Spread of Leprosy of the Nation of Hawaii was passed, approved by King Kamehameha V. According to
Kamehameha.
historical accounts, this act in essence criminalized leprosy. Citizens who either had the disease or were suspected of having it were rounded up and abandoned in a remote area called Kalaupapa on the island of
What?
Molokai. To most
What?
That McDonald's bag.
What?
That McDonald's bag.
What are you talking about?
Is that McDonald's bag yours?
Yes, I'm eating. When I'm done eating, I'll play Fortnite with you, okay?
Most of you, this probably looks like a stereotypical depiction of paradise, but Kalaupapa was chosen due to its nearly inescapable cliffs, and without any resources to build boats or canoes, the otherwise beautiful waters were deadly. Keep in mind, the process of arriving at the Kalaupapa settlement in itself was already heavily traumatizing. First, you're arrested simply for being ill, but on top of that, you're also ripped away from your family, and in many cases, it was actually children who were being taken away. You were then examined, oftentimes fully nude by several individuals at once. Then you were placed on a boat. Many already
Okay, I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Okay. That's my forehead. Yeah, it's pretty big. I'm sorry.
gravity mentally broken, refused to disembark, resulting in them being thrown overboard and made to swim the rest of the way to shore. This all while being terribly ill, and as mentioned earlier, oftentimes having open sores or wounds caused by the illness. It's said that quite a few people drowned before ever making it to land, but those who did survive did not have it easy. Ambrose Hutchinson, a resident of the Kalaupapa settlement from 1879 to 1932, wrote, "After our names, ages, and places we hailed from were taken down, we were left on the rocky shore without food and shelter. No houses provided by the government for the likes of us outcasts." Another resident, this time unnamed, stated, "Like the other patients, they caught me at school. I was on the Big Island. I was 12 then. I cried like the dickens for my mother and for my family, but the Board of Health didn't waste no time in those days. They sent me to Kalaupapa. That's where they sent most of us. Most came to die." Most came to die. Here's what that meant. People being forcibly taken from family is already bad enough, but to make things even worse, those who were sent to Kalaupapa were never allowed to return home. Many that were taken as children grew up on the settlement and eventually passed away as adults, all without ever seeing their families or homes ever again. Some even mentioned not being able to remember who they were related to. Being sent to Kalaupapa was basically a death sentence. In the 1940s, a successful treatment for leprosy finally became available, and while this should have been great news for the residents of Kalaupapa, it wasn't. The quarantine and exile still remained in place despite most patients having been cured. By 1959, Hawaii became the 50th U.S. state, but even being a part of America, for some reason, wasn't enough to end the exile. In fact, it would be a whole 10 years later in 1969 when the isolation laws were finally lifted and those living in Kalaupapa could finally leave. Now, it goes without saying that all the early residents at the settlement unfortunately passed away at Kalaupapa, but some of the later ones are still alive today and, believe it or not, still voluntarily live exactly where they were once forced to. In many ways, while this story is about disease and its physical horrors, there's also a lot to be said about its social horrors as well. Hawaii was far from the only place to unjustly treat those suffering from leprosy.
Like entering a prison, Japan. Why am I eating like so? Well, I haven't eaten a little bit, like 2 hours ago. But let's get on. Leprosy sufferers reflect on decades of pain. A class action has lifted the lid of mistreatment, which saw. Yeah.
All over the world, those with the disease were treated as subhuman, dirty, even somehow of lower moral value, and while leprosy for the most part is quite rare these days, it still very much exists, and one can only hope that going forward we've learned a thing or two from our history and past mistakes about how to treat those significantly affected by illness.
It was like on crit, bruh. On crit, cuz. That's what he looked like.
Sometimes what's most disturbing isn't necessarily what you see, but rather what you hear. It isn't what you know, but what you don't know that has the most potential to make your skin crawl. This entry features the most recent story of tonight's video. In fact, it occurred just a few months ago, specifically in late November 2019. To this day, however, there are no answers, no solutions, no way to make sense of what you're about to hear. At the beginning of this video, I issued a warning about disturbing content, and I feel the need to reissue it before we proceed. If you find the sound of someone in extreme distress upsetting, then I highly suggest skipping forward.
Ugh. Oh, man. Bitch, if someone's screaming, call the cops. Don't go out and look, you stupid whore. I'm gonna just stand and look around. My name's fucking Karen.
This clip was posted to YouTube by the Los Angeles Police Department on November 14th, 2019. Its description explains what's happening here, at least to the extent that it could. At 11:20 p.m., witnesses on the 3000 block of 3rd Avenue heard a female screaming, "Help me, somebody help me." At the same time, witnesses observed a possible four-door white Prius with 2 occupants inside speed off southbound on 3rd Avenue. A female, black, with dark braided hair, identified as victim Jane Doe, was believed to be in the front passenger seat and the suspect in the driver's seat.
It's probably
Witness 1
because she was
observed
black.
Jane Doe's hair being pulled backwards as she was screaming. Witness 1 observed plastic wrap over the front passenger side window from a possible prior traffic collision. The suspect was heard shouting, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." This, unfortunately, is the extent of what we know about this case. Since we can't see exactly what happened and neither could witnesses, it's unsure if this was
She's
a
just
domestic
black and
abuse
screaming.
case or possibly even
The hoodlum.
kidnapping.
The
For
hoodlum's
first
just
2 weeks
screaming.
after the
Just
incident,
don't
there
help
seemed
her
to
out.
be a fair amount of attention circulating around this case. News articles came out, a press conference was held. But despite all of this and a plea for more information, there just weren't any solid leads. The only update was to the car's description. It was not a white Prius, but rather a 2003 to 2008 Toyota Matrix, according to police. Many are quick to point out this woman and her seemingly nonchalant attitude as she stands there listening to this possible kidnapping. The public naturally assumed that she did nothing, and neither did anyone else in this household. The thing is, though, the video most people have seen is incomplete. In fact, the one I showed you is said incomplete version that everyone else saw as well. If you watch the extended version, immediately after the video cut off, a man, presumably this woman's husband, emerges from the home and takes off in an attempt to follow the Toyota Matrix. Based on the state of things now, however, it's safe to say that he unfortunately wasn't able to track them down. Like I said at the start of all this, there aren't any answers, and at this point the case seems to have been all but forgotten. Who exactly was Jane Doe and where is she now? Is she even still alive? It goes without saying that most cases like this, unfortunately, don't have a happy ending, so if by any chance you know something about this, or even if you just think you might, then please contact the authorities directly using the information you see here. If you're like me and have no way to help in terms of offering information, then what you can do is to keep the conversation about this case going. Tell a friend about it, show them the video posted by the LAPD, tweet about it, whatever you can do. I know that this case may not be the most headline-worthy, but
Why the
it's
fuck
something
was this
that
bitch
collectively
just
we can
standing
still at
there?
least
Like,
try to do something
fucking
about.
stupid ass whore. I hate
Leatherface,
fucking people.
Buffalo Bill, American Horror Stories, Bloody Face. The trope of the serial killer who wears either a mask or a suit made of their victim's skin is classic at this point. But as many of you know, this ghoulish display has its roots set in America's very own dark history. It's impossible to mention these characters without bringing up killer and grave robber Ed Gein, who I'm sure you all know had an infamous tendency to create clothing, furniture, and other household furnishings out of human body parts. The thing is, though, this was way back in the 1950s, and since then we really haven't seen another notable case involving a skin taker, at least not here in the US.
Not in the U.
January 1999. The day had just begun for a local tugboat operator tasked with repairing his vessel. Something was wrong with its propeller. Sort of. The issue, truthfully, wasn't the propeller itself, but rather that something had gotten caught in it, causing a jam. A pain, sure, but overall a simple fix, and not a surprise either. Things get caught in boat propellers all the time, be it nets or whatever other stray material finds its way into the waters. Upon inspection, however, the boat operator slowly grew more confused. Whatever was lodged in there didn't look like anything he'd ever seen before. It was pale, and on top of that, it was giving off a strong, foul-smelling odor. It was then that the man noticed something unspeakable. A human ear. Could someone have gotten caught in the propeller? People have died in such ways before, but that wasn't the case here because, well, it wasn't a full body that was lodged in the propeller, but rather skin. Just skin. And yes, it was human. Authorities were contacted immediately, and upon full extraction of the remains, it became apparent that what they had was a neatly removed skin from a female torso, with incisions made along the lines of the limbs, and for some reason up to the neck and to the left ear. The nipples had also been removed, and a week later, a leg was found in the same river. DNA testing thankfully led to the identification of the remains, revealing that it belonged to one Katarzyna Zawada, a 23-year-old student at a nearby university who by that point had been missing since November of 1998.
Damn.
But who exactly was this girl, and how did she end up like this? Not much is known about Katarzyna, unfortunately, aside from the details of her grisly death and the subsequent murder investigation, but most sources describe this girl as having been shy and suffering from depression. She was also said to have dressed plainly and was an only child. Her father, unfortunately, had passed away a few years prior to her disappearance. The religious studies student lived with her mother, who realized that something was wrong after her daughter missed a routine psychiatric appointment, which they were supposed to attend together. On top of this, Katarzyna was known to be suicidal, and in fact had previously attempted to end her own life. This, of course, only made her disappearance all the more alarming. It also became apparent that Katarzyna had been skipping the last 3 weeks of class, something her friends believed was due to some kind of secret relationship. Overall, the murder investigation was messy, to say the very least. There were a number of suspects and even a major red herring. Just a few months after Katarzyna's skin was discovered and rumors of this being a Silence of the Lambs copycat killing were running rampant, it seemed the killer had been revealed. A shocked elderly man had called the police with terrifying news. He'd found a beheaded body in his basement, and to make matters even worse, he speculated that his grandson was responsible. It's unclear whether or not the elderly man knew this at the time, but the corpse belonged to his son, and the killer was indeed his grandson, who not only killed and beheaded his father, but also skinned his face in order to make a mask. He later admitted to wearing it around the house, while also donning his dead father's clothes. Now, interestingly enough, this person actually attended the same university as Katarzyna, but it was ultimately determined by authorities that he had nothing to do with her murder. He, of course, was charged and eventually went on to serve his sentence in Russia, where he and his family had originally immigrated from. A number of other names were brought up, but every single one led to a dead end, and by the year 2000, the case had been closed. It wouldn't be until 12 years later that this case would be formally reopened. A cold case unit ordered re-examination of Katarzyna's remains with newer technology, and according to their later findings, they believe that the girl was actually tortured before being killed, and possibly even skinned alive. Over the course of this investigation, the FBI even stepped in to assist in the case, and from this came a psychological profile of the killer. The authorities then returned to an early person of interest, one called only by the name Robert J. by Polish media. Robert was actually brought up by various tips numerous times during the initial stages of the murder investigation. Many claim that when they heard the news about a girl murdered and skinned, Robert was the first to come to mind. It was said that he hated women and even had a record of harassing them, spying on them through windows, and writing unsolicited letters. It's still unknown if this Robert person and Katarzyna actually knew each other. Robert did frequent the same area and had been known to take walks near the river where the skin was later uncovered, but to this day, Robert denies ever having known the girl. As mentioned earlier, Katarzyna was thought to have a secret relationship that started about 3 weeks before her disappearance. This not only due to her truancy, but also because she began to dress up and dyed her hair a different color, something that was uncharacteristic of her. Authorities, of course, leaned into the idea that this Robert person was Katarzyna's new romantic interest at the time, and that he had used this trust to lure her into his home and murder her in cold blood after senseless torture. Robert was 52 years old by the time he was arrested, something that came following a raid in which blood had been found in his bathroom. After examination, experts determined that with, quote, a possibility that borders on certainty, that this was blood left behind by Katarzyna. On top of this, Robert had also previously worked in a dissection lab for a time, and he'd also held another job that involved prepping animal skins. As things stand right now, however, Robert J.'s official status is that of a suspect. For whatever reason, in late 2019, the courts requested a private trial, and as such, the outcome is not currently clear. By all accounts, Robert does seem to be the culprit, and we can hope that authorities got it right this time because the private trial is that of a such. The outcome is not currently clear. By all accounts, Robert does seem...
That is the police there? Whoa, crazy.
to be the culprit. And we can hope that authorities got it right this time, because it's horrifying to think that someone capable of torturing a young woman and skinning her alive was able to roam free for the better part of 2 decades. For many of us, the idea of being stalked is pure nightmare fuel, and rightfully so. But for countless individuals all over the world, the issue of stalking is no nightmare at all, but rather a reality, one that can slowly chip away at one's psyche, and at the very worst, even result in a life being cut short. In this entry, we're going to be taking a look at a viral 2019 case from Korea that, for one, thankfully didn't end up that way, and on top of that, also managed to be the catalyst for a nationwide debate centered on the issue of stalking and violence against women in general. We'll get to why in a second, but first, let's talk about the clip that made this incident blow up. The roughly 80-second clip opens with a hallway, and before too long, a young woman appears. She approaches her door, begins to open it, and then this happens. As you just saw, the girl in this clip managed to escape, but only just barely. Had she had taken even a second longer, this man, who she has no relation with, would have been able to gain access to her home, and then who knows what could have happened. Immediately following this failed attempt to get in, the man then proceeds to linger, trying the doorknob a couple of times, knocking, and at some points he even appears to be trying to guess the door's passcode. Thankfully, he eventually gives up and leaves. This situation in and of itself is obviously horrifying enough, especially given how narrow of an escape this ended up being, but to make matters even worse, later footage obtained from the surrounding area shows us how the man was able to find the girl's residence. Here, he can be seen following her home, not all that far behind her. According to the media, the suspect turned himself in the next day. He claimed to be 30 years of age and drunk at the time, which led to him supposedly having no recollection of what happened. Initially, he was to be charged only with trespassing, but the Korean public, simply put, were not having it. While this was all taking place, the clip in question was hopping from platform to platform. Upon word that the man in said video was only to be charged with trespassing, a petition was formed, one that ultimately accrued nearly 80,000 signatures, prompting Korean authorities to also tack on an attempted rape charge. As for why the initial charge was so light, according to the authorities, no physical contact had been made, therefore no further charges were necessary. But of course, this is problematic for a number of reasons. For example, it's pretty clear from this video that the man intended to do more than just open a door. As for what exactly, no one can be sure aside from him, but to many, this whole situation was just too close for comfort, and not assigning him some kind of heftier charge just seemed absurd. Many note there being a problem with the overall system. According to the Korean Herald, the penalty for stalking, if it's even pursued at all, is shockingly low, just $89. Under the law on punishment of minor offenses or consistent harassment, any person who requests a meeting or date by consistently attempting to approach another person, or watches, follows, or secretly waits for someone against explicit will of that person can be punished with a fine not exceeding $89 or by misdemeanor imprisonment. It goes without saying that in terms of legality, there's quite a long way to go, and many are calling for immediate change, praying that the results won't be too little too late. It's horrifying enough to think that someone is watching you from just around the corner, but what's perhaps even more nightmarish than being stalked isn't that there's no one there to help you, but rather that there's no one truly willing to. At least not until something absolutely horrific happens. This girl, as we all know, truly is lucky.
Yes.
We've all seen those viral videos of people licking ice cream or other things for views, and stuff like that makes it abundantly clear just how easy it is to tamper with products that are inevitably going to end up in someone's household. Obviously, licking ice cream and putting it back just makes you a terrible person even if you faked it, but that doesn't mean you're actually intending for anyone to get hurt. What if, however, someone who does want to cause mass harm gets the same idea? It's something we generally never think twice about. We assume the products we buy at grocery stores have been sealed and therefore are safe. But tampering is very much a real thing, and disturbing accounts can be found all over the world. Here in America, however, the most famous case of product tampering is probably what's been dubbed the Chicago Tylenol murders. In the early hours of September 30th, 1982, tragedy would strike. Although it was a Thursday, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman wasn't in school. This
that a
due
boy
to
or
the
a
fact
girl?
that she wasn't feeling
That's a
well.
girl.
Her parents, just like millions of others would, decided to treat her with extra-strength Tylenol. Mary's father, Dennis, described what happened next in a later interview with the Chicago Tribune. I heard her go into the bathroom. I heard the door close. Then I heard something drop. I went to the bathroom door. I called, "Mary, are you okay?" There was no answer. I called again. "Mary, are you okay?" There was still no answer, so I opened the bathroom door, and my little girl was on the floor unconscious. She was still in her pajamas. Mary was actually dead. Her tiny body, unable to handle the more than lethal dose of potassium cyanide that was, unbeknownst to her and her family, placed into the Tylenol she'd ingested just moments earlier. A few miles north of where the
Damn, I'm gonna end the stream. Thank you guys for watching. I actually look buff, but I was looking fat right there, because I am fat. Sorry. Bye.